Horizon Swarm Studio X, and this is how satellite reveals China's Taiwan invasion plan. But on Real Life Lore. Here's latest Real Life Lore video. Yeah, okay. I'm pretty sure like China was building bunkers near Taiwan or something. Like, okay. And yeah, they literally have planned for certain period. Like before this, we are gonna reclaim Taiwan or something. Like there's some like next level shit when you think about it. Like nothing is happening right now. There was like this like told in advance. Like this is gonna happen. It was all a surprise, right? But Taiwan is one of those things. If it happens, like yeah, this is not really a surprise. China said we're gonna do this. So I don't know how this is gonna go on, especially with how Trump projected his power with Iran. Like this is not the guy you want to fuck around with. Like if China suddenly decides fuck it, it's Taiwan attack, Trump will respond. At least he has proven that now. Like a lot of things are symbolic. This is one of the symbolic things. So yeah, if I think China's gonna wait until Trump is no longer in power. I think he's gonna do that at least. China's at least going to do that at least. Because who knows who's going to come after that, right? It could be some democratic guy who's like really, like too hardline peaceful, where he doesn't want to do anything. It could be anything like that, right? It could be someone who's incompetent, whether it's Republican, Democrat, who knows. So I think China's gonna wait until Trump is out of power. Because whatever your opinion is of Trump, Trump did say, "Fuck it, I'm gonna attack Iran," and he did. Like, yeah, he probably gonna do the same if China try to attack Taiwan. I don't know. So let's watch this one.
January of 2025, a satellite captured a curious image of something happening in the Chinese megacity of Guangzhou near the country's southern coast. A dry dock in the city was busy constructing this strange-looking ship, something that a handful of foreign intelligence analysts at the time suggested could be a Chinese landing vessel. And then only a couple of months later, in March of 2025, the completed vessel and two other similar-looking ships were spotted by satellites again, this time off of China's far southern coastline, practicing a series of interesting maneuvers. This time, the satellite captured the three barges connecting together to form a huge causeway from the rearmost barge, and then through the front barge directly towards a beach, with accompanying Chinese civilian cargo ships and ferries practicing right alongside them. And then, only a few weeks later after that, a series of photos taken by the Chinese themselves of the exercises began spreading around on the internet, showing the three barges from the perspective of being down on the ground on the beach itself, showing the long causeway from the rear.
Look at this barge thing is very weird to me. Like I've seen this, I don't know, like many other channels like Tascam, I don't know, Chris Cappy and other Cappy Army and channels like that. Okay, look, man, here's what I'm gonna. Isn't this like kind of dangerous? Like, if this shit happens and Taiwanese army literally just attack the barge itself, like blow that shit up with RPG or something, at that point, like, your whole thing is like, there's a massive hole in it, right? Like, what's the point of the barge after that? Isn't this like easy target? And I don't know, like, imagine that shit. Like, okay, they're literally preparing for this. Like, okay, we're gonna create a barge, we're gonna invade like that, okay. And Chinese army is like not experienced, right? They haven't fought any wars, but they are one of the most advanced army on the planet, alongside USA. So it's like this is like very weird situation. Like if this shit happens, it'd be really interesting to see like how China works, right?
Rear barge connecting all the way to the front barge with an offloading ramp extending directly onto the beach. Interestingly, just wide enough to accommodate the offloading of a heavy main battle tank. It didn't take very long for many analysts to begin recognizing that these new barges could be a part of China's ever-evolving strategy to launch an all-out invasion of Taiwan at some point in the future. The island that the government of China regards as a rogue renegade province that China's leader, Xi Jinping, has repeatedly promised will be brought under Chinese Communist Party rule some way or another, either through diplomacy or through force. Of course, one of the biggest obstacles that has been standing in the way of an all-out Chinese invasion of Taiwan for decades has been the fact that Taiwan is an island. And in order to get their army over to that island, China will need to transport their soldiers, vehicles, and equipment over the sea in a titanic amphibious invasion, like a modern 21st century version of the D-Day invasion of Normandy during World War II. And China is aware that any amphibious invasion of an enemy consists of two different steps. The first step—
I mean, not really. D-Day was different. It was like a very different assault. It was like very time sensitive. Germans could have fight back at that scale. But this is literally, like touching China. If there was no USS support, they would have done it by now, like any means necessary.
Step is rather straightforward and consists of actually assaulting the beach, storming and overcoming local enemy positions, and establishing a localized beachhead. The second step is more complicated, and is likely what these new barges are designed to help out with. After the initial beachhead is established, the invading force has to make the beachhead sustainable in order to actually hold on to it, and to expand their control even deeper into the enemy's territory. The beachhead has to be logistically supplied with adequate amounts of reinforcements, ammunition, fuel, food, medical supplies, and other materials to make sure that they don't just run out of supplies surrounded by hostile territory and implode in on themselves. So in order to make a beachhead sustainable, the invading force usually has to take over a nearby port that's ideally closely located to the initial beachhead, through which they can then begin bringing in all of their necessary supplies and reinforcements for the troops to hold the beachhead and then expand beyond it. But in most cases, securing a nearby enemy harbor to the beachhead that's still perfectly intact is no easy feat. During the Allied amphibious invasion of Normandy during World War II, the Allies' solution to this problem were the now famous mulberry harbors, which have no doubt been studied extensively by Chinese military planners for a possible Taiwan amphibious invasion today. Rather than spending huge amounts of time and resources trying to capture—
that is one of the most craziest shit I've ever seen. That amphibious landing like that, right? Barge is open, right? You get dropped into the water with like chest deep water. Now your clothes, armor, guns, everything's wet, right? And now you're gonna fight a German army with German machine guns. Probably you're not gonna survive. When you survive, even if you survive, you're wet as fuck. That's how you're gonna go to sleep. When you think of all this shit, like every single leisure thing that you enjoy every day becomes much more like you appreciate that more and more, right? Every small thing. And anything you would bitch about, you're like, well, how small this is compared to that.
well-defended enemy-occupied ports that would probably be sabotaged and damaged anyway and take even more time to repair and bring back online, the Allies' solution was to simply bring their own temporary portable harbors to the coast of Normandy instead. Merely hours after the Allies had established their beachheads in Normandy after the initial D-Day amphibious assaults, the many sections of the Mulberry harbors were towed from England across the Channel and put into position in two different beachhead locations, Mulberry A and Mulberry B. The Mulberry harbors basically consisted of a series of floating breakwaters, pontoons, piers, and floating roadways that the Allies were then able to stitch together and use to rapidly offload reinforcements and supplies through onto the beachheads, which enabled them to become sustainable and to be able to expand deeper into the interior without the need to spend crucial time and effort capturing any of the sabotaged German-occupied ports in northern France instead. Nonetheless, even during this operation, Mulberry Harbor A was destroyed by a violent storm just a few days after it had been established, limiting the Allies to the use of only Mulberry Harbor B for the next several months. Now, for China's modern considerations for a 21st century amphibious invasion of Taiwan, there are many geographic facts about this part of the world that will make it even harder to pull off than the Allied invasion of Normandy was. The distance that the Chinese invasion fleet will have to travel across the Taiwan Strait will be roughly similar to the distance that the Allied invasion fleet had to travel across the English Channel. And just like the Allies experienced in Normandy in 1944, the Chinese can also expect that Taiwan's defenders today would likely sabotage their own ports rather than risk them falling into Chinese hands intact. Which means that the Chinese will have to bring their own—
I think that this time is very different. Only thing I would surmise modern world is that defensive capabilities. Defensive? Is that how you were? I don't know. Like anti-thing capabilities, like anti-anything. Anti-tank, anti-plane, anti-jet ships, anti-anything is much more stronger than anything else. So some advanced mines and shit would be much more overpowering today compared to back in World War II. So I think amphibious landings, I don't know how they would do it. I think China would need a mine clearing type of thing before they can even bring it. But then again, like Taiwan could just resupply before like amphibious things come. So in modern world, they're relying on like putting tanks in Taiwan. I don't know how would that even work. I would assume like they would use an insane amount of like missiles, ballistic missile thing, completely disable Taiwan before getting air superiority and like land from there and try to control it rather than actually do the amphibious thing. That feels weird to me, like trying to put tanks there. Like, does that even work in modern time? I don't know.
Ports with them in order to sustain their initial beachheads. However, a significant amount of the Taiwanese coast is ringed by extensive coral reefs that in some locations can stretch for hundreds of meters off the beaches, severely complicating the ability for an invasion force to bring their own Mulberry Harbor-style portable ports to bear. Moreover, the island of Taiwan just also has very few suitable beaches that a traditional amphibious invasion force can choose from to attack with any good odds of success. The island only has a total of 14 so-called red beaches dotted around the island where conditions are considered optimal for an amphibious assault, where the coral reefs extending from the shoreline are either small or non-existent, where the terrain is relatively flat and easier to assault than the rugged, towering cliffs that are seen across most of the island's east coast, and where the beaches themselves are also located nearby to strategically crucial targets for the Chinese to capture, such as Taiwan's capital and the largest city in the north, Taipei, and Taiwan's principal and largest maritime port down in the south, Kaohsiung.
Okay, how are they gonna stop American Navy there? If American Navy is there, like they're probably gonna be there because they'll realize when this shit is gonna amp up. They'll through satellite image they'll know like when this like they'll just put ships there, right? So how are they gonna like go around that? People said like when India Pakistan thing happened, China might be playing in the background because with Trump tariffs and how Apple was trying to put factories in India. So if India is at war, Apple would not put factories in India and shit like that. Like people like these conspiracy theories are going on. Like who knows what's true or not? These are all conspiracy theories. But I would say China would need to do something like that. China would need to create some destabilizing thing somewhere else where US's whole focus is there and Navy is kind of occupied there before they attempt Taiwan thing. So US doesn't have enough time to send resources. Something like that. But then again, like doesn't like US have like 12 aircraft carriers? Even if like through maintenance, they would still have like 4 or 5 or 6 at any given time. So even if they're preoccupied somewhere, they would still have 1 or 2 aircraft carrier and like enough destroyer with it to like go at Taiwan and still cause issues. So I don't know how China is going to like go around US's Navy, but yeah.
However, the vulnerability of all 14 of these red beaches are very well understood by Taiwan, and so they're consequently the most heavily fortified and well-defended beaches on the entire island, making any traditional amphibious assaults on them a difficult task. All of these problems, though, can potentially be solved by China's new invasion barges that have been spreading around the internet these past few months, which Western intelligence sources have nicknamed the Shui Kao class of vessels, literally Mandarin Chinese for water bridge. When hypothetically approaching the Taiwanese coast, these Shui Kao barges, which will probably always operate in pairs of 3, will carefully position themselves one after the other in a row, with the smaller barge of the trio in the front, the medium-sized barge in the center, and the largest-sized barge back in the rear. Each of the barges carries a set of super heavy retractable legs with them on board. When the barges are still in transport, these legs will be retracted and stowed above the ship. But once they're in position near the beachhead, the legs will be lowered to pin them down to the seabed beneath them and to lift their hulls out of the water, giving them increased stability in the choppy coastal waters, almost like miniature offshore oil platforms. Each of the barges also has a tower in their front and a long bridge stored on their decks while in transport. Once the legs have stabilized the barges in place, the towers at the front will telescope out their bridges to create a giant portable causeway extending out from the rear barge to the center barge to the front barge to the shore, extending out nearly 825 meters from the rear barge. It's also been suggested by several other analysts that these heavy-duty bridges will be capable of supporting and fitting heavy vehicles such as armored personnel carriers and even main battle tanks. Together, the Shui Kao barges effectively function as both a movable port and a movable bridge at the same time.
That is yeah. I'm guessing these ships were like under development for past multiple years. They're like, okay, we need to create barge to invade Taiwan. Yeah, it's just like normal feeling there. Like, yeah, we're gonna invade Taiwan. I think they basically justify that, like, oh yeah, Taiwan is like rogue government. We are just reclaiming our land back, type of thing. That's probably going to be the sentiment everyone have in China. So yeah, this is just one of the technology they have now.
working in unison with Chinese civilian roll-on roll-off or ro-ro ferries commandeered for military service. The People's Liberation Army can then
Ro-ro
rapidly
ferry.
dock these ro-ro ferries carrying vehicles with the larger rear barge and disgorge their heavy vehicles and equipment into it that can then rapidly storm ahead across the causeway and directly onto the beachhead. Two analysts affiliated with the China Maritime Studies Institute, J. Michael Dahm and Thomas Schugart, argued in a paper they wrote in March 2025 about these Shuikao barges that they would likely be capable of offloading onto the beach an entire heavy combined arms battalion, including roughly 150 vehicles, in only about 40 to 60 minutes after they had extended their causeway.
Numbers going to be insane,
Over the
man.
course of a full
All the conflicts we've seen recently with the Ukraine thing and like all the numbers when it comes to China thing. If China decides to invade Taiwan, the numbers would be staggering. Like they'll just throw off numbers like 100 tanks, 200 tanks, 1,000 tanks. Fuck it, there you go. The numbers would go insane. Like just instant, like small battles might have like hundreds of tanks in it.
day, they could theoretically unload several hundred armored vehicles, all brought to them by any number of China's dozens of civilian ro-ro ferries commandeered for military service, which have all been intentionally designed for dual-use purposes in mind, with the capability to handle unloading and offloading heavy-duty military vehicles like tanks. With their long length far out from the beach, the ro-ro ferries will be able to safely offload all of their vehicles onto the rear Shuikao barge without any fear of them running aground in the shallower waters closer to the beach. With their very shallow draft and distance out from the shoreline, the Shuikao barges also appear to be designed to overcome Taiwan's coastal coral reefs that ring most of the island, opening up more potential beaches beyond the 14 well-known and well-defended red beaches that the Chinese invasion force could potentially assault. Going even further, the Shuikao barges could also theoretically extend their causeway to connect directly to one of Taiwan's coastal highways, disgorging their vehicles directly to the island's highway system and ignoring the beaches altogether.
That's insane.
This is potentially the biggest threat that the new Shuikao barges pose to Taiwan's defense. They've been estimated by some analysts to potentially
That is so fucking insane. This is like one of those alien movies, right? Like they somehow have some seamless technology that just connects to some ship or something that Earth has. And just like, oh, look at that. They just like basically seamlessly integrated this. And that's the threatening part. Basically, China's trying to do that. How about barge directly connects to the fucking road? Imagine that scene when you see that shit happening. Where barge comes that is connected to this massive ship and just directly connects to the road and tanks passes through. Like, oh, that's some next level.
expand the number of beaches that the PLA could land at on Taiwan by around 40, on top of the original 14 red beaches, greatly expanding the number of potential beaches that the Taiwanese will now have to consider preparing for their defense, and risking them spreading out their limited resources too thin and leaving behind weaker, vulnerable defenses at some beaches that the PLA could find and exploit during an invasion scenario. The PLA would likely only utilize
That
the
is so
Shuikao
true, man.
barges after their Navy and Air
I didn't even thought of that. Like, if this shit actually happens, let's imagine that this is actually happening. 40 places they could attack. So Taiwan can't defend all of them. So Taiwan basically prioritize things like main cities, Taipei and all that, which basically gives half of the Taiwan just open there for taking when it comes to China. And China doesn't even need to take the whole island down. They could literally occupy the half of them, and that's the new reality now. Like, okay, China controls half of them. Even if like no wars happen and they just like occupy that, that's it, game over. Like, what is anybody going to do, right? US has already been like, because of China, US has already been like saying like, yeah, there is no such thing as Taiwan, it's still China. So like China could say like, yeah, we've been saying this for a long time, like either Taiwan is China. Like, yeah, this is ours, we're just occupying our own place. What you talking about? The technicalities are already there. There's a reason why China gets pissed off. Anybody like says Taiwan, right? John Cena had to like do all this apology tour and shit like that. This is the reason for it, like diplomacy. Like once they occupy it, like how are you going to present anything to the world? How is US going to justify anything? Like, okay, what are we trying to do here? Like, yeah, there's already China. Okay, what? So this is really fucked up, man, when you really think about it. Like, this is really premeditated. Like, it's already planned out. Taiwan really needs to like increase their defenses. There's some technology that actually defends their shores, or actually have US ships there like surrounding Taiwan when time comes.
Air Force had already achieved maritime and aerial supremacy, and after the initial beachheads on the shore have already been established by the first wave of D-Day style amphibious assaults. granting the PLA the ability to then rapidly offload their heavy equipment and supplies onto the island to press on the assault deeper into the island's interior. If the Shui Cow barges arrive too early without PLA maritime or aerial supremacy established first, they'll just be sitting ducks while trying to offload their equipment and will be easy targets to defending missiles, drones, and artillery.
Yeah.
Moreover, the satellite images that have captured the Shui Cow barges practicing have so far only shown them operating within calm waters, which might mean that they could struggle in rougher weather conditions that commonly happen within the Taiwan Strait.
Look, man, to me, China right now doesn't have that great record when it comes to like Pakistan had Chinese defenses. Didn't work. So all this technology sounds so good. And obviously there are a lot of people in the comments always say like, yeah, Chinese things doesn't work. I'm like, no, that's not true. Most of the world uses Chinese thing. Every single thing people use are made in China. So that's not true. But yeah, there is that element, right? Like this thing, oh, this isn't that so awesome? What if water is not calm and this thing doesn't work and just literally topples over? Like there is always that thing, like maybe this is not foolproof. Maybe any kind of like disturbance or like not having good weather could topple this thing over. At that point, like game over. What was the point of all this research and thing?
Just like what the Mulberry Harbors experienced during the Normandy landings, when one of them was destroyed by inclement weather within only a matter of days. A second set of Shui Cow barges have already been observed by satellites to be under construction in the same Guangzhou shipyard in China right now. And if China ends up building enough of them, it's conceivable that they could help China overcome one of their greatest challenges of all when it comes to an invasion of Taiwan: seizing control of the island before anyone from the outside world can intervene against them and stop them, like the United States, Japan, and Australia. If the initial PLA amphibious assaults are successful at establishing their beachheads on Taiwan like the Normandy landings were, and then if the Chinese can bring in their Shui Cow barges and their commandeered civilian ro-ro ferries, within hours of that happening like the Allies were able to do with their Mulberry Harbors and Normandy, Thomas Shugart wrote in his paper that I mentioned earlier that it would be conceivable that the PLA could unload up to 8 heavy brigades complete with all of their vehicles, supplies, and around 60,000 troops on Taiwan during just the first wave of the attack within just the first 24 hours, with significant reinforcements being delivered over the following few days. If the PLA could achieve a rapid takeover of Taiwan before the outside world even had the time to react to it, then would they? Some other analysts argue that in this light, the Shui Cow barges are designed as a psychological weapon just as much as a real weapon.
Yeah,
they
that makes
serve
sense.
as a major symbol that China is very serious about investing resources into establishing their ability to actually invade Taiwan. And they add a degree of plausibility.
I mean, this might not be accurate, but yeah, have you seen those Chinese movies? The old Bruce Lee and shit like that. All those movies always have like certain like monologue style, like people like do all these moves and karate thing and all that shit just as an intimidation technique, and then fight starts. So China could have that mentality, like we need intimidation thing. Like this is psychological more than anything. So people are always on the toe, like Taiwan doesn't ease off or USA doesn't ease off. So when it comes, like they build some kind of like a treaty or like do better business thing to like make sure China doesn't get pissed off, right? They're always on their toe, right? Like Trump is right now trying to make a deal with China. So shit like this could like really put up the pressure, like, okay, let's not piss off China. That's the perceivedness they might want. So yeah, it could be psychological, who knows?
To Xi Jinping's frequent threats of invasion. China, naturally, would rather that Taiwan surrender without a fight at all, and convincing Taiwan's leadership that the invasion will be both inevitable and successful is the best way to do that. And these new Shui Cow barges certainly send a message that the odds of an invasion are at least more plausible than they were before. Regardless, in order to even use the barges in the first place, the
See, this
PLA
shit
will
with
have
this
to
is
think
like, okay, even let's say Taiwan's politician says like, fuck it, fine, we give up. Are the people of Taiwan ready to live under Chinese occupied place, like communist China's government, the way it works? They might not be. So how are you going to do that? Like this surrender thing doesn't work now with the level Taiwan is now, the level of money that Taiwan has, the level of economy Taiwan has. They've been living like this for a long enough time now, like this is their life. People mentality and how they live has changed. How are they just going to live under like a Beijing rule? That doesn't even make sense. Like, so why would they give up? That doesn't make sense, especially when US is with them. US needs Taiwan and a lot of like Taiwan has real thing, like micro to, like chipset and shit like that, right? TSMC and things like that. So US has real resources there. Something that Taiwan can do, a lot of people, a lot of countries in the world, including US, can't do. So yeah, it's like a commodity. US can't give up Taiwan. So US is gonna defend Taiwan. So why would Taiwan do anything? Like, they have USA with them.
Face fierce resistance from determined Taiwanese defenders while crossing the Taiwan Strait and while assaulting the beaches to establish the initial preliminary beachheads. And they could potentially face determined American, Japanese, Filipino, and Australian auxiliary defenses as well that could all work to deny them the ability to even accomplish this first phase of the amphibious assault altogether, and render the Shuikao barges a rather moot point. So in order to reinforce both the psychological and real potential of the Shuikao barges, China has to be able to credibly threaten the destruction of any Allied intervention on Taiwan's behalf as well, in order to try and deter any Allied intervention from happening in the first place that could slow their invasion down and potentially defeat them. And in order to understand how the PLA is doing that, we actually have to travel very far away from Taiwan and the seas around the island to a very unlikely location: the remote and sparsely populated deserts of far northern and northwestern China, thousands of kilometers away. This is the Dingjin Test and Training Base located in China's section of the Gobi Desert.
Okay.
A massive facility used by the People's Liberation Army Air Force for weapons integration testing, training, and tactics development. It is an ideal location for them to do all of this because it's in a very remote, sparsely populated location with huge amounts of wide open airspace, leading some analysts to compare the importance of Dingjin to China to Nellis Air Force Base in the deserts of Nevada to the United States. And relatively nearby to the Dingjin Test and Training Base out in another one of China's remote deserts known as the Taklamakan, satellite imagery has recently captured a lot of things that kind of seem to indicate what the People's Liberation Army Air Force is actively training for. On the 1st of January of 2024, Planet Labs released an image that one of their satellites had captured in China's remote Taklamakan Desert, showing what looks like a mock-up of an aircraft carrier. And not just any aircraft carrier, but a nearly perfect one-to-one identical mock-up of one of America's most advanced current nuclear-powered supercarriers, the Gerald R. Ford class. There is a structure in the mock-up that's almost precisely in the same location as the Ford class's island, and there are exactly 4 mocked-up catapult launcher tracks on the deck that are located exactly where they appear on the real Ford class carrier. Based on Planet Labs data, it appears that the PLA began constructing this mock-up US carrier in the desert sometime in November of 2023, fairly recently. However, going further back in time, there's been a general outline of an aircraft carrier here in this exact location for a while, since at least 2021. And before it was completely filled in with a full aircraft carrier that we can see now, the PLA had built 2 smaller aircraft carriers within the overall silhouette. And interestingly, this aircraft carrier is far from the only American ship that the Chinese have built a one-to-one replica of out here in the desert. In fact, the area is almost littered with them. Just 4.5 kilometers away to the northwest is another full-scale replica of another US Ford-class aircraft carrier.
Why?
And dotted all around nearby are multiple one-to-one mock-ups of what appear to be Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers. One of the US Navy's most modern and capable class of destroyers at the present that are typically used to escort carriers in a strike group formation. But most
Are they trying to see their missile testing? Like, they would test missile here to see what blast radius they have or something? Like, what's the point of this mock-up? What are they trying to do? Like, this is like drawings on the desert. That's what this is, right? So I don't get, what's the point of this? Or they're trying to do some kind of like real life, like some kind of a tactics, like, don't you have computers? Like, why are you doing this then?
interestingly of all is this line that snakes across the desert in between all of these mock-ups of US warships. This line appears to be a very large railroad, roughly 6 meters in width, approaching 4 to 5 times as wide as a usual railroad is. Interestingly, this super wide railroad begins at what appears to be a storage facility of some sort, and then extends for several kilometers in a straight line before curving rapidly through the desert and then curving again to simply end in the middle of nowhere. The railroad doesn't curve to avoid any obstacles in the flat desert, and the reason why it curves this way starts to become apparent when you see other photos of the railroad and understand what its true purpose is. Yeah, the PLA is using the railroad to load up one-to-one models of US warships like the Ford-class aircraft carrier, and then sends them down the railroad to simulate a moving target for the Air Force and Rocket Force to fire at. That curve through the desert appears designed to simulate a carrier's evasive maneuvers through the ocean that it would take to avoid an
This feels like very childish to me. Like, okay, this is very one directional though, right? Like, okay, this is the only maneuver that Ford class gonna do, and like this is on land. On ocean, things might change a lot. Like, how are you gonna do the mock up on land like that? Like, if you're gonna do this, like, do something in the ocean. At least there's something to it, right? I don't know, like join together a few ships to pretend to a bigger ship and do target practice that way. I don't know. They're trying to do this in desert for a ship that operates on water. I mean, I don't know, man. This feels weird to me. Like, even if you do everything right here, it's like very one directional, right? Like you are training your missiles in very one specific scenario. What if that scenario doesn't happen? Like, what if they fumble everywhere else? Like, I don't know.
incoming missile. There's other satellite photos of mocked-up carriers on this exact railroad blown to bits after being targeted by missiles and rockets.
And they act like these aircraft carriers won't be defended by Aegis, Patriot, and many other planes and shit. They act like, oh, aircraft carriers are just going to be one singular thing that's going to be sitting there, sitting duck type of way. Most of the aircraft carriers, they already assume are sitting ducks. That's what America assumes. And they create defense around it. Like, okay, let's watch. Okay, there is Aegis, there is Patriot, there's THAAD, right? There's many other, like, fuck it, put lasers on it. F-35s, many planes and things, destroyers in advance. Many anti-defenses things, like anti-missile things going to be there. How are you going to get anything through?
And there are satellite photos of the stationary aircraft targets blown to pieces as well. It's pretty clear what the PLA is preparing for here. But if it wasn't any more clear, the location of all of these ship mock-ups in the Taklamakan Desert isn't just for the remoteness and clear open skies. The location is also about 2,600 kilometers away from known People's Liberation Army rocket force launch sites that are located in China's Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region, which is just about the same distance to simulate long-range missile strikes from the interior of central China into the South China Sea, a region that China claims almost in its entirety against the competing claims of the Philippines, Vietnam, and Malaysia. Far away in the similarly remote deserts of Inner Mongolia near to those PLA rocket force launch sites is another curious creation that the
Yeah. If South China Sea belongs to China, then Indian Ocean belongs to India. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, how are they just claiming that? Harassing Philippines and everyone. That's just insane to me. Like, do you think that's actually gonna work? I mean, come on. You know what? I'll do go right now. Like, yeah, I'll do this second half later, I guess. Where this has been insane so far. Like, they've been ramping up, right? They're actually testing missiles against U.S. aircraft carrier. Like, okay, how do you, when Trump goes to make a deal with China, what if Trump literally brings pictures and like, what the fuck is this? Why does this look like Ford class carrier completely? Is this a threat? Are you threatening me? Like, how do you do business when shit like this they're literally creating target practice against one of your ship? Isn't that completely on the nose? Like, if you just create a silhouette of some big ass thing, that's it. You can't really claim anything. So it's literally is complete shape of a Ford class carrier. How you explain this? To me, this is weird. And Trump is kind of a guy who would like just go with the picture. Like, what is this? What you doing here? Why does this exist there? It's one of our ship. Why is like a picture like that exists there? What you doing? Why are you creating replicas like that? What you doing? It's just weird to me, but okay, I guess like they're preparing for the invasion. I guess like in 2029, 2030, shit like this might happen. This is insane. So yeah, wars have become a thing in this decade. And before this decade is over, shit's gonna ramp up. Right, well, if you like my channel, subscribe and I'll see you next time.